Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Teaching Corequisites with Creativity. It looks like we might still have a couple of people hopping on, so let's just give them a minute to get settled and then we will begin. Okay, so as the last couple of people are trickling into the webinar, I just wanted to thank everyone again for joining us today. We have a great webinar all about teaching corequisites with creativity, trying to bring some creative teaching strategies into your course and ensure that these courses are more efficient for you and for your students. I do want to note, and I put this in the chat as well, that all attendees have been muted upon entering the webinar. That is to reduce background noise so that we can hear all of our speakers for today. Today we have with us Shawnda Smith. She's going to be starting the webinar here in a few minutes. She is an assistant professor of mathematics at Texas Women's University, and she has some really interesting things to share about her experiences, teaching corequisite courses and how she's kind of transitioned to improve upon them in the past. I'm really excited to hear from her. We also have Connie Richardson and Paula Talley from the Charles A. Dana Center at UT Austin, and they're going to share the lessons that they've learned over time with kind of advocating for these corequisites and helping instructors through them and all of the work that they've done. I'm really excited to hear from them as well. We did receive several questions in advance of the webinar, and I know that Connie and Paula have kind of worked things out to try to answer as many of those as possible, but we do want to hear from you throughout the webinar as well. So if you have a question, please go ahead and share it in the questions box here on GoToWebinar. I will help field those questions and get them to people to answer. We also have on the line Anthony Palmiato, who is the OpenStax editorial director, and he will be available to answer any questions that come up about the resources that OpenStax has and all things related to OpenStax. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and allow Shawnda to present. Give me just a second here. And we'll get started. Let's see.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Shawnda Smith. I'm at Texas Women's University, and I was going to share all of my experiences that I've had so far with corequisites and just different ways that Texas Women's University has approached this and things we have changed throughout the process and why we made the changes we did. First, about Texas Women's University, it is a public university located in Denton, Texas. A lot of people think it's private. It is co-ed, even though the name is women's. We are primarily focused on education, nutrition, business, arts and sciences, and especially nursing and the healthcare professions. Those are the primary majors that we focus on at TWU. We're ranked one of the top 10 in the nation for diversity, and we're a Hispanic serving institution. So it kind of gives you a way to see like what kind of population we have. The developmental math structure for 2018-2019, this was before we made any changes. We had our 2 developmental math classes, which was Math 1113 and Math 1123. And then after students completed their developmental math stages, they then moved on into their college level credit course, which was either financial and quantitative literacy or quantitative reasoning. Elementary analysis at TWU elementary analysis is college algebra. And then we also had the statistics route. Now, what tells them what they need to go to is based off their major. Now, in the 2019-2020 school year, we did a co-requisite model with our second developmental math course and our quantitative reasoning course. So they started off, if they placed in the first developmental math course, they took the first one, and then the next semester they would do the co-req model. They were both 3 hours, so students were taking 6 hours of mathematics. After they completed that co-requisite model, then they could move on to college algebra or statistics. The structure of our co-req course from last year was if you passed Math 1013, so Math 1013 was our quantitative reasoning course. So I can go back to that slide. So if they passed in the co-req model, if they passed Math 1013, the quantitative reasoning, they automatically passed Math 1123, the developmental math course. The primary reason that choice was made was because if they're already able to pass a college level course, why would we hold their developmental math course against them? All face-to-face enrollment was happening for these courses, except when COVID-19 shutdown happened, everything had to go online. With this model from last year, we did a commingled format. So our quantitative reasoning course, students that were in developmental math and students that were not in developmental math could be in the same section. There wasn't any sort of if you're in this math course, the developmental math course, then you have to be in the quantitative reasoning course. And now in the spring, we did pilot one of those where they were cohorted together. They were not commingled. Cohorting meaning that, you know, they were in this section 1, let's say, of our developmental math course, and they went into section 1 of the quantitative reasoning course. Instructors of the quantitative reasoning course did not know who was enrolled in the developmental math course specifically. They could find that information if they looked at their schedules, or they asked the students, or they asked just me as the developmental math coordinator, but it wasn't just like public knowledge. I didn't send a roster of who was in the developmental math course specifically. Now, the good and the bad of this. So the only co-req option was Math 1013, which Math 1013 again is quantitative reasoning. Some don't need that course for their major of choice. Some need college algebra, some need statistics. So we had this kind of situation where they had to go into quantitative reasoning, and then from there, if they passed that, could go into their major course. So that was a bad side of it. We were making everybody take a course that maybe they might not need. Now, it did satisfy their basic requirements as far as their core requirements for graduation. So it did count for something, but you know, Stats 1 or college algebra counts for that as well. Commingling. So there are good and bad parts of the comminglings. At Texas Women's University, our quantitative reasoning courses are quite large, but our developmental math courses are quite small. So meaning our developmental math courses are capped at 30, but our quantitative reasoning courses are capped at 38, 40, or 50, depending on the class they're assigned to. So having the ability for them to be commingled meant that our quantitative reasoning courses could keep their size. And there was also no coordination in instructors assigned to the course because because they were commingled. We didn't have to specifically say, okay, this instructor is teaching this 1123, this developmental math course, and this instructor is teaching quantitative reasoning. We kind of, the administration treated it as 2 separate courses because they were commingled. Students were unaware of who was also in Math 1123. They might have somebody who was in their developmental math section, but since they were commingled based off scheduling, they could have been in their quantitative reasoning course with somebody who's in a completely different section of developmental math, and they wouldn't necessarily know who was in what. End of course coordinated grading with multiple instructors. Like whenever I had to coordinate the grading, because if a student passed quantitative reasoning but failed their developmental math course, I then had to go through and figure out if essentially what I ended up doing was their developmental math instructor sent me the names of students that failed. I figured out who their quantitative reasoning instructor was, and their quantitative reasoning instructor then said yes, they passed, or no, they failed, and then I had to get that information to the instructors of the developmental math course. Because again, if they passed their quantitative reasoning course, they automatically pass their developmental math course. So that was a little bit of a mess at first. I figured out a good way to do it pretty quickly, but it required a lot of coordinating to figure out the grading. And then students actually were able to trick the system based off our system of scheduling. They were able to sign up for both classes because the schedule system made them do that, but they were also able to go back during add drop time and potentially drop portions of it. So we had some students that were enrolled in the CoRec, but they would, during the add drop time, they would drop their developmental math course, or during the add drop time, they would drop their quantitative reasoning course. And there wasn't any flag happening that would kick them out of the other class because they were not linked together specifically. So what did we do? Well, just to let you know, we did change how we place the students a little bit. So the placement in courses, we based it off the TSI. This coming school year, these are the scores we're going to be using to place them in the TSI. And we have a bit of a new structure. Just to go over this, they got if you know about the TSI, that is actually going to be changing this coming year. So if you're in Texas, there's going to be a new TSI 2.0, so to speak. But I can come back to this slide in a second if you need to. Now, how did we implement the Corequisite curriculum? So based off what we did for this past year and what we're actually doing this coming year, we used XYZ homework. I reviewed the quantitative reasoning course calendar and the textbook. So because I was developing a CoRec for quantitative reasoning, I got their textbook and their calendar, and then reviewed everything that they were going to be covering in quantitative reasoning. Then I used OpenStax books for developmental mathematics. So I took from the elementary algebra, the intermediate algebra, and the introductory statistics, and I organized the OpenStax content to align with my quantitative reasoning course content when it was addressed in the course. So I used XYZ as my platform to organize these things. I pretty much went through the quantitative reasoning course textbook in the calendar and tried to say, okay, if they're doing this topic in quantitative reasoning, what developmental math topic addresses what do they need to know before they get into this topic to be successful? And I used XYZ to organize that in a very straightforward way for my students. So essentially taking 3 textbooks and making it into 1 textbook. Now I tried my best to make sure that the developmental math course was running approximately a week earlier than what they would be doing in quantitative reasoning. So if they needed factoring in quantitative reasoning, then I would try to review factoring in my developmental math course a week before that happened in my QR course. Now this coming year, we have a slightly different setup. So we still have our first developmental math course, but then after, or if they might place into one of these, if they complete their first developmental math course, or if they place into the second developmental math course, they now have the option to go to the quantitative reasoning with developmental math and the elementary statistics with developmental math. Majority of our majors at Texas Women's who placed into developmental math were actually needing elementary statistics, not quantitative reasoning. So we are developing the course this summer to match up with elementary statistics. And we still have the need for college algebra, and that's going to be coming next year. But according to our numbers from the past, students who place in developmental math, there were maybe enough for 1 section of the CoRec with college algebra. We did not have a lot of students who placed in developmental math that needed college algebra based off our previous data. But again, it's planning on coming the next semester. So we'll be offering a statistics option along with quantitative reasoning. We are also going to be cohorting our courses. So what's good about that is that we'll have smaller sections of statistics and quantitative reasoning courses. Like I said before, quantitative reasoning courses could be 38, 40, or 50 students. Our statistics courses are even bigger than that because we have so many students that need to take statistics. A lot of our sections are 50 plus, some are 75 students, But with cohorting, meaning I have somebody in developmental math section 1 going into statistics section 1, those students are the same students in both. So that statistics class is actually reduced significantly. So that's one plus, that we have these students who are in a developmental math course taking a college level course, and they know each other, and they are together for both courses. And then the actual courses are going to be a little bit smaller, capped at 30, so that the instructors are fully aware that these students might need a little bit more help, might need a little bit more time to grasp what's going on. We've also been paying attention to the instructors for the course. We're really trying to have the same instructor for both, so it's more of a seamless transition between what they need to know for statistics or quantitative reasoning and then what they are doing in quantitative reasoning or statistics. Their final coordination or final grade coordination will be simplified, because if we have students in section 1 for developmental math and section 1 for quantitative reasoning or statistics, then it'll be easier to figure out who passes what, especially if they're the same instructor. And students are going to be unable to trick the system now. Since we have the courses linked specifically, they can't get into the statistics class unless they're enrolled in the developmental math class, and they can't get into that specific developmental math class unless they're enrolled in that specific statistics class. And they can't drop one of them. It kicks them out of both if they decide to drop one. I just kind of wanted to show you what happened this past, well, based off, I have here fall 18, spring 19, that was before we did the co-recs, and fall 19, spring 20, and this was after we did the co-requisites. So you can see the percentage pass and fail. You can see in spring 19, especially that semester, we had a lot of failures in Math 1123. This is for the developmental math course. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the students who ended up, we have one less students in spring usually, but that we also have students who failed the fall 18 going into the spring 19, and there are still issues happening there. But then if you look in the fall 19, spring 20, whenever we actually started doing the co-requisite model, you'll see that the fail rates drop significantly. And then in the next slide, I show you what happened in our quantitative reasoning course. Now, keep in mind, in our quantitative reasoning course, the students were commingled. And so you would think that if we have this co-rec model if we have students that are in quantitative reasoning that aren't necessarily ready for it, they might make our fail rate go up, but it actually ended up staying about the same the whole time. So you have fall 18, spring 19, where we didn't have the co-requisites, and then fall 19, spring 20, where we did. And everything pretty much stays about the same as they go through with our pass rate and our fail rate. All right. I think that's all I have for you.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of questions specifically for your presentation that maybe would be good to quickly go over now.
Okay.
Jenny has a couple of questions just for clarification. Which course was the co-req course that you talked about, and what was it the co-requisite to? But I think you might have clarified that one.
So the co-req course that I have graphs for right now, the one that we've actually done, was the second developmental math course and quantitative reasoning.
Okay.
Get that clear.
And just as a reminder, which class was the Math 1123?
1123 is the developmental math course, and the 1013 is the quantitative reasoning course.
Perfect. Let's see. Kendall asks, are y'all's developmental courses pass-fail, or are they letter grade scoring?
They are letter grade scoring, but they're essentially pass-fail. On their in the system, whenever you submit their grades, it's a developmental A, developmental B, developmental C, but their developmental course grades don't count towards their GPA. So essentially, it's pass-fail, but they can see if they got an A, B, or C in it.
Okay. Let's see. Are the statistics courses coordinated? Maybe some for quantitative reasoning?
There is a coordinator who is different for the quantitative reasoning class and the statistics courses. They are coordinated by another professor. but we work together to try to figure out how to best format our developmental math courses to support what's going on in the quantitative reasoning and statistics courses. But yes, they are all on the same calendar. They all use the same textbook. So they're very coordinated, which makes it a little bit easier to do a co-rec with that if we know exactly what they're going to be covering when.
Great. It looks like I have just 2 more questions here. Let's see. Rebecca asks, was any of this covered by IRB, or was it just kind of for internal review and your own knowledge?
As far as our pass rates, this is just internal grades. I just pulled the grades for all of the students in these 2 years. As far as, you know, complications and the good and the bad and things like that were things that happened to us. It was not IRB backed or in any way.
Okay. Christopher asked, what placement test do you use, and what do you do about placement, or what have you done about placement with COVID and, you know, remote testing, if anything, so far?
Okay, so we use the TSI, which I'm showing that slide. The TSI is the Texas assessment, and these are our score breakdowns. But with COVID happening, there are options for our students to take the TSI digitally with a proctor. So that's something that is being explored right now. I know that Texas is trying to figure out what exactly to do with students who can't take their TSI in this coming school year due to lack of resources or inability to get to a testing center. So there are some things in the works. I'm not really sure as far as, I know that right now we're still requiring them to take the TSI to place into mathematics. And if they don't, they default to our math 1113, our lowest level. But again, I think that right now our school is still trying to figure out what we want to do this coming year. But they have the option to take it digitally with a digital proctor if they would like to pay for that. And they usually have to pay for the TSI anyway. So it's just, they have the option to do it online where our testing center isn't open right now. They can take it other places if they have their testing centers open, but I'm not sure if anybody has any testing centers open at the moment.
Okay, it looks like we have a couple more questions that came through. Let's see, Jill asks, do the statistics courses have the same final exam? Is that exam commonly graded? And what about quantitative reasoning?
Yes to both. So in the quantitative reasoning course and in the statistics course, they have a common exam. They are commonly graded in that the majority of the final exams at Texas Women's University are in the math department are mostly multiple choice, but there are some free response. So the multiple choice is graded by the department. The free response rubric is given to each of the instructors on how to grade those free response questions.
Okay, and then it looks like a couple of people have asked this question, and then we'll move on. Can you talk a little bit about the methods of instruction that are used for the developmental course in particular?
So in the developmental courses, if it's a face-to-face course, our students are given, it's very outlined for our instructors who teach these courses in that they are given fill-in-the-blank notes that match pretty closely to what they're going to be covering in the class. The instructors traditionally have discussions and lectures regarding those fill-in-the-blank notes. And then the homework assignments are through XYZ Homework Digital, so that the instructors can look and see how the students are doing, but the students get automatic feedback from doing their homework. And all of our face-to-face courses that for developmental math are in computer lab type situations. They're like the labs that are set up for lecture as well. So all of our students have the ability to get on to XYZ, look at their digital textbook, or be looking at their homework while they're in class. So the instructor can be going over the notes for that specific class, and then they can be applying that in their time, either in between example problems or at the end of class. If there's a little bit of time, they can work on the homework all together. as far as the going digitally, which we had to do, urgently, we recorded videos for all the students, essentially kind of breaking down our note sections. And so we had instructors recording their own videos, or I recorded some videos that all the instructors used, just kind of going through the notes, going through example problems. So they were asked to watch those and then go into the our office hours, which we had digital office hours through Google Meet, discuss homework problems if they could. A lot of them had, because we switched from in-person to online, we still had our time slot. So we had a lot of our instructors who posted videos for them to watch, but then on Monday, Wednesday, at that specific time their class normally met, they would get on Google Meet and they would just have class discussions regarding the homework questions and quiz questions and things like that on XYZ.
Awesome, thank you. If anyone else had a question for Shawnda that you needed an answer to, just go ahead and indicate that your question is for her and we'll make sure that she gets it. We are going to move forward and I'm going to change Connie to the presenter so that she can share her slides.
Hi, everybody. Tried to show my webcam. Not sure if you are seeing me or not, and I keep skipping out of presentation mode, but we'll give this a try. So I'm Connie Richardson from the Charles A. Dana Center, and with me is my colleague Paula Talley. Paula is having trouble with her camera, and so if you hear a disembodied voice jump in, then that's Paula. We're really pleased to be able to join you here for this webinar. I'd like you to notice up in the upper right-hand corner, there is a tiny URL of that lists where some session resources have been dropped in. So if you can grab your phone and take a picture of that, it'll pop up again several times, and I believe maybe Symphony's going to drop it into the chat as well. So when you go to that tiny URL, it's a Dropbox folder, and you'll see some folders and files in there that hopefully you'll find helpful. I do want to point out a couple. One is this contemporary math folder, this placement folder, sample syllabi, and this reference list. Okay, so hopefully all those resources are helpful to you, but there are some that I wanted to spotlight specifically. So we had some pre-submitted questions, and one of them was, I'll be teaching a contemporary math, liberal arts math class as a co-requisite. I'm looking forward to ideas, and so that's why I pointed out this contemporary math folder here. I think the question was really more about co-requisites, but just in case it was about contemporary math as well, then there's some resources in there specific to that course. Then there was a cluster of questions about content, a cluster of questions about teaching co-requisites online, and then there was also a kind of a standalone question about success rates in co-recs. And so we're going to start off with the cluster of questions about content. So you can see here what some of those questions were about. And the first one, do most colleges have a uniform curriculum grading standard for co-requisite courses? And I would say probably we can't say that most colleges do anything, but that there is a recommendation that, that you do have a uniform curriculum for your co-requisite courses. And in fact, we would recommend that all of your freshman level courses have a uniform curriculum. And so there's a template that's in that box folder. And our suggestion would be that you fill out kind of the right-hand half of the template, that it is about what's going on in the parent course, the college level course. The department collaborates together to come up with that common calendar of content that you're going to work through during the semester, and then back up from that to figure out what the support content should be. And Shawnda was actually talking about that as what they did in their department. So that course coordination, really, really important for Gateway courses. I'll go back to that question about the success rates. There's a lot of questions about whether people are watering down their courses in order for CoREC students to pass and that sort of thing. And we definitely don't want to see that. And so if the department is collaborating on what that calendar looks like, and then collaborating on what the support content looks like, then everybody knows it's very transparent and we all have a good feel for what's happening in those courses. And so there was, how do students learn fundamental math skills before being introduced to college level math? And so that's what Shawnda was talking about, like, kind of a few days to a week ahead of time, we're starting to build in those skills that are going to be useful in the credit bearing course. I'm going to jump to the last one. This person doesn't want to just spend twice as long or whatever it is on the college level content, and this kind of scheduling will prevent that from happening. You really are catching students right before they need that foundational content. Just catch them right in the moment. This is what you're going to need tomorrow when you get to your college algebra class or to your stat class, and then those skills have meaning at that point. And how will I integrate CoREC material into an already packed schedule? I'm wondering if there's a concern there that your CoREC class isn't enough hours. You really do need to make sure that you've got a sufficient number of hours for your CoREC students. There are a couple of examples, well, actually, there are quite a few examples of calendars in that box folder. So here is one from Roane State Community College, and you can see on the right-hand side, they're teaching statistics. They calendared out, course coordinated the statistics course. This is the first half of the semester. And then they backed it up, and in the left-hand side is what is happening in the CoREC course. They course coordinated all the way down to, they have a common workbook that their CoREC students work through that helps them prepare for their next statistics class meeting. This is a commingled model where there are both college-ready and corequisite students in the statistics class, and then the CoREC students have this extra class meeting. We've got examples as well of cohorted models, and so this is an example of a cohorted pre-calc class where they're just embedding the content. So if you can see, I'm not sure if you can, it's kind of small, sorry, the concepts that have brackets around them, those are developmental content. And so you can see in this cohort class where everybody is has been designated as not college ready, right? There's no college ready students in this class. They can reorder the content as need be. And so they reordered where the first 2 weeks, first 2.5 weeks really, is basically all developmental content. And then halfway through week 3, they're starting to get into some more sophisticated functions, but they've built up their skills to get to that point. And as they move on through the semester, they're just doing college level content, college level. And then over here in, is that week 7, we see some developmental content pop back up. So there's several examples of these in the box folder, and for all the different math pathways as well. There's statistics examples, QR, college algebra, business math, lots of different examples, both cohort and co-bingo. The other question about the other kind of cluster of questions where there were several about student engagement and effective strategies and methods when you're teaching online. So previously I was just kind of talking about CoReX in general, but now we're talking about online. And I would say just one thing to bear in mind is, good teaching is good teaching, whether you're face-to-face or online, whether your students are college ready or not. And so come back to that. So that when you're talking about teaching CoReX online, that it's just, you have to attend to everything just that much more, right? Like online students, you just have to be that much more intentional because you're not with them there face to face to get all of that nonverbal feedback from them. And then CoReX students may question whether they belong in school. They may be very uncertain, so they just need extra attention as well. And so we'll talk some more about that sort of thing later. But I did want to just kind of jump in really quick with tools, because I was kind of surprised that in none of the questions that I got in advance, nobody said anything about tools. And back in the spring, that's all anybody could talk about, right, was tools. And so I do want to come back to the tools question, because there was a lot of focus on different kinds of tools and a lot of concern about students not having internet access. But really the big problem that is starting to surface is not about access, but about the age of the technology that students have. And so many students have older technology, it's less reliable, and that contributes to higher stress. It puts the cognitive load on, is my technology going to work, not on, how do I master this mathematics content. So bring your own technology. Students might have just a cell phone, right? Like we're like, curse students' cell phones, put your phone away. But really, we have to be grateful that students have cell phones now, because that may be the only way that they have to connect. Some of these issues, I know faculty had issues with some of these things in the spring. Faculty joining some of our webinars, we would ask them to join with camera and microphone so that we could talk to them, and they'd say, I don't have a camera, I don't have a microphone, I don't have a printer. And so students have these issues, and it's really, like I said, adding to their stress, adding to their cognitive load. So just be aware of that when you're making your assignments. Give students options other than joining with a webcam. Can they do something else rather than printing things out to write on and scan back in? Is there something else they can do? So we've got just some top level considerations for technologies, and I'm just going to stress on considering cost. Don't add on cost to the students. And make sure that it works well on a smartphone, so that students, that's their only technology, that they'll still be able to function in your class. All of these slides are in the box folder as well. Okay, so let's get to that student engagement and instruction. So like I said, good teaching's good teaching. And so this is some research, 30 years ago or so, but it's all still true, and it's been adopted by the professional math associations. They have endorsed all of these ideas, and then Chickering updated this in terms of thinking about online instruction about 20 years ago. And when you think about just the fundamentals, even though technology has changed, those fundamentals about teaching online really have not. So the seminal research around online teaching is from Garrison, Anderson, and Archer. And I'm gonna just commit terrible sins here in the next few minutes, and then I'm just going to give you like a surface level introduction to some really deep ideas that people have written books about, they do week-long workshops about, they teach classes about. but I'm just going to give you this like really, 30,000 view, and you can go check out the references list that's in the box folder for any of these ideas that you want to learn more about. And so this idea of creating a community of inquiry, our teacher eyes kind of go straight toward teaching presence, but I would encourage you to start on the left with social presence. All the research says that setting up the social presence is hugely important in terms, in order for the teaching presence and cognitive presence to kick in to the depth that you want, then you have to have this social presence set up. And that's not just about being social, which is part of it, but it's about getting students to engage in discourse, which is where they really deepen their understanding. So I really can't emphasize that enough, that getting that social presence and that culture, that community of inquiry set up early in the semester, like day one or even before day one, is really going to go a long way towards student engagement, which was kind of the big overarching theme of that second cluster of questions. The teaching presence, of course, we want to pay attention to that. And so there's kind of these three components. Design and organization, I'll touch on a little bit in a minute. Facilitating discourse, I already talked about that real quickly. And then there's these direct instruction components, and we'll talk about that. And then kind of underlying all that is assessment. How do we, in an ongoing way, formatively assess how students are doing? Well, if you're facilitating discourse with students, and that can be in a discussion board, for example, then you know which students are deepening their understanding and which students are lost. And so just having ongoing formative assessment as well as your summative assessments is really important. Here's a sample template. I would even say this one might be a little bit too complicated, but your LMS really needs to be super organized and super simple. And let's just say, look at this weekly folder. The student knows, orient the student that they go to weekly folders. Weekly folders has the material chunked out. And they can go through this process with the weekly folders of going through a cycle of learning a little, doing a little, receiving feedback, learning a little more, receiving feedback, etc. So just really think about organizing so that students know exactly where to go and all their assignments are there, very clearly organized. Again, think about where you want the cognitive load. You don't want it to be where they're just like all over the place trying to find things, but they know exactly where to go. Some macro level instructional strategies. It's related to that cycle that I was just talking about. You need to get the brain's attention in these small digestible chunks and let the students process for a while. Give them some feedback, and then give them a chance to apply new learning. Each chunk is 5 to 7 minutes, and there should be one takeaway in there. So, when you're doing when you're creating videos for your online course, be sure that those videos are very targeted, very short, and then and that not only helps with the brain processing, but it also helps with those technology issues that I was talking about earlier, and access issues, student bandwidth, that sort of thing. I would feel remiss if I didn't go back to the community of inquiry and talk about that Harrison Wood have added on this idea of equity presence. We've got to keep an equity presence in mind in all that we do. And so when we look at 5 equity-minded practices for teaching online, I'm not going to go into all of these, but I'm going to say, like, the top: be intrusive, be race conscious, be relational. Sometimes people say, I treat all my students the same, but really your students are not coming in the same. They're coming in having been a recipient of microaggressions. They've been the recipient of stereotypical behaviors. And so be intrusive with those students, be relational, reach out to them, make sure that they know that they're welcome in your class, that they belong in your class, and so on. And again, like I said, I'm doing this a disservice by just talking about each of these topics really quickly. But we definitely need to attend to these, and you've got the citations in order to learn more if you're interested. One of the most equity-minded practices that you can do is to disaggregate your data. Make sure that you know who is being successful. If you've got a 75% success rate in your CoREC, don't be satisfied with that. Look at who's being successful, because it's possible that students are having different success levels. And there are reasons why that could be happening that have their foundation far before the start of your class. So think about cognitive frames. A deficit cognitive frame is to think about inequalities as being natural, as being cultural deficits, a lack of student motivation or student self-initiative, when really an equity cognitive frame tells us that inequality is not natural, that students have been subject to institutional racism in terms of unequal access to a quality education. We know schools are different, schools are funded differently, schools are staffed differently. And so our job is to take a shared responsibility for the student learning and help them overcome those inequalities that they've suffered in the past. And if we don't attend to our data by disaggregating our data and being equity minded, then we are perpetuating those inequalities. I mentioned design a little bit, and I would just encourage you to read about universal design for learning, because it can help you help students who had unequal experiences in the past. And so I'm not going to say a lot about that other than to say I would just encourage you to learn more about universal design for learning. The last pre-submitted question was about the 30 to 40% of students passing, the other 60 to 70% are failing. We need a better option. And I just have some questions about that, in that we know that corequisites are doing better than the traditional method. If I go back here, most people who are doing corequisites at scale are reporting somewhere between a 55 and 75% success rate. And that, I mean, that's at scale. Like, they have done away with all or almost all of their developmental courses, but they're still having high success rates. And in many cases, the success of the CoREC students is higher than the college-ready students, because the CoREC students are getting those extra supports. They're still responsible for meeting the same learning objectives. In most cases, they have common final exams, and the CoREC students are outperforming the college-ready students for performing equally as well. So I have, and what we know is we don't want to go back to the old method, because we know how few students make it all the way through the pipeline under the traditional developmental sequence. So I would just encourage you to look at refining your CoREC model, not at moving away from your CoREC model. Some things to think about: are students in the right math pathway? Recent research from Community College Research Center was that the right math pathway makes a big difference. Think about those course calendars. Is your content well aligned? Is your pedagogy well aligned? If you have two different instructors, are they saying things the same? Is their vocabulary aligned? Is one of them completely lecture and the other one is active learning, or vice versa? Do you have a sufficient number of hours on your CoREC? And have you done surveys or focus groups with your successful students and your unsuccessful students to see what it is that maybe is not serving the students? They might tell you that the content is not aligned, that it's not helping. They might tell you we don't have enough time. So doing focus groups and surveys can really help you pinpoint if you're only having a 30 or 40% success rate, why. Okay. So I think that's just, we've got some tools in the box folder that might answer some additional questions. There's an FAQ in the Corec tools document. And I do want to be sure and put up again the box folder link and my email and Paula's email. We're happy to talk to anybody about this. And now I'll open it up.
Thank you, Connie. We actually did have a couple of questions come in, and we have time to get them answered. If you still have a question that you haven't asked, go ahead and ask it in that questions box. The first question I have here from Jenny is, can you talk a little bit more about the tools that you mentioned at the start of your presentation?
Can you still see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. My window closed out, so I'm not sure. So I think you're talking about when I was all the way back here. Sorry, you guys. I was trying to click directly there and that didn't work. Just back in the spring, people were asking about like all the different kinds of proctoring methods, all the different kinds of apps. And what we discovered is that students were being required to get all these different apps from all these different instructors, and they were having difficulty getting them to work. They had, old machines or old phones. An example, something I can tell you is that, it's better to coordinate within your department and hopefully across campus. Hopefully your campus has some guidelines, but what happened in the spring was people didn't know what their campus guidelines were. And, everybody was just on spring break and frantically trying to figure out how to set up their classes. And they started adding in all these apps. And so students were having to just do multiple apps, and in some cases having to pay for apps. Just encourage you to collaborate across your department, across campus, to try to minimize the number of apps and tools that students have to pay for, or even have to use, even if they're free. I had another thought about that. We definitely want to make sure it meets accessibility requirements. You would think that all the apps would these days, but they don't. So I would just encourage you to be sure that you investigate before you require students to do something. And I do want to talk about proctoring services a little bit. If you're going to use a proctoring service, really think about privacy and security issues, and think about students may not, those proctoring services in general cost money. Is your campus going to pay for it, or is the student going to have to? An acquaintance of mine the other day, just out of the blue, had to get a proctoring service for her final exam. First time all semester. Now she's got to have a proctoring service. She paid the money. She couldn't get it to work. She only had a 2-hour window to get it done. She ended up having to delay, had to pay another fee because of the rescheduling. Requiring students to do something new in an already high stress situation is not a good situation for anybody. So really think about any technology requirements you're putting on the students. Paula is adding in a link to we have some longer interactive webinars coming up starting Wednesday. And so if you go to the link that she's got there, it's going to be over about a month period, 8 hours of topic, where we can really go into depth on some of these things.
Great. I have one more question that that's just come in, and it's, do you have opinions on scheduling of co-recs? Right before the regular class, right after, a different day? What seems to work best based on your knowledge?
Well, there's ideal, and then there's what'll work for a campus and the students, right? So ideally, we like to see a situation where if the co-rec can meet on Monday, Wednesday, and then the credit-bearing course meets on Tuesday, Thursday, then you can front load that content, right? Like, so on Monday, you can go over, this is what you're going to need on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, you're like, this is what you're going to need on Thursday. Get that foundational material in advance. That doesn't always work. If you're a community college with students driving in from an hour or 2 hours away, and they can only drive 2 days a week, then a couple of ways to think about it is, if you do it before, we would recommend that students that you do foundational practice, and then they should be able to go home and practice. That's why we like that alternating day schedule. But if you have co-rec at 8 a.m. and then you go to the college level class at 9 a.m., the student didn't have much time for independent practice in there. But you can still say, this is what you're going to need at 9. Let's go over the slope formula, right? Like, yeah, maybe you haven't seen the slope formula since high school. Let's go over the slope formula. If you do it right after, then I think you really have to tell the students, you know what, we're going to take 10 to 15 minutes for questions over what you just did in your college level class. But after that, we're going to get ready for the next meeting. And so that's just our main advice, is that you, rather than letting homework questions spill over and take up the whole time, just limit it 10 minutes. And then the rest of the co-rec class is getting ready for the next credit-bearing meeting.
Thank you. It looks like we have just one more question, and that is if you have any advice for instructors who will actually be, proctoring their exams themselves. Any tips there?
Shawnda, do you have any tips there?
Proctoring the exams online? I'm just making sure I understand.
It doesn't specify. So if you have anything for whether it's online or in person, I think either would be helpful.
I mean, I would say probably the online version. We started trying to do Zoom, where we all had the students meet at the same time, and because we could actually watch it. So we would have the students meet at normal class time digitally, start working on their exams, and then they could request like a side going into a breakout room if they had a question. So we could leave the class essentially and go into that breakout room, answer their question, and go back. But we could tell, I mean, we have students that could potentially still work the system, but we could really see where their eyes were, see that they were actually working on what they were supposed to be working on, ideally.
I would add to it to maybe think about different strategies for assessment as well. So if you do some projects or some more kind of open-ended work, and give students options, maybe have them create a video where they explain to you as they're working the problem, that sort of thing, and upload that. That gives some options away from having so many exams and so many proctored exams, and having to proctor so many exams. I would say I'm not advocating that you have just a midterm and a final and that they both count 40% and everything else is 20%. I'd say, that if you only have 2 exams, but that your projects and open-ended work should be a substantial portion of the grade. The students are really kind of being caught up in this online situation as well, right? And so just expecting that they need some options.
Great, thank you. It looks like that's all the time that we have questions for today. I want to thank all of our hosts, just again, Connie, Paula, Shawnda, for all of your work getting these slides together and fielding the questions that came in advance as well as during the webinar. I also want to thank the Texas Community College Teachers Association for partnering with us on this webinar. They have been a huge help. And of course, again, Connie and Paula at the University of Texas at Austin Charles A. Dana Center. You all are really, your expertise in CoreQuisite is unparalleled, so we have been really happy and fortunate to be able to work with you on this. For everyone that maybe has some lingering questions or just wants to dive into this a little bit more, I will say that we have a part 2 of this webinar on August 4th. You can register at that link on the screen. I'll also include that in the chat. And we'll just be diving in a little bit deeper. We also have a webinar. We had a question come in before the webinar about OpenStax resources for Corequisite courses. And we have a webinar on that next week. You can see all of our webinars on our website here at openstax.org/webinars. I will again include both of those links in the chat for anyone who wants to check those out. Thank you again. Thank you all the attendees for joining us today and asking such great questions. This has been really fantastic.